The Arizona desert stretched endlessly under a merciless sun, its crimson rocks glowing like embers against the pale blue sky. Fort Huachuca, 1886. The air smelled of dust, gun oil, and something else, fear. The Apache warriors, led by the legendary Geronimo, had been raiding settlements across the Southwest for months, and the U.S. Army was losing ground. Soldiers whispered in the barracks about shadows that moved faster than bullets, about warriors who could vanish into the landscape like smoke. Captain James Whitmore stood on the fort's wooden rampart, his jaw tight as he surveyed the surrounding mountains. A telegram crumpled in his fist. Another supply convoy ambushed. 12 men dead. The Apache knew every canyon, every water source, every hiding spot in this godforsaken terrain. His own men were exhausted, demoralized, jumping at shadows. That morning, a lone rider approached the fort gates. The sentries raised their rifles until they saw the Union Jack patch on his worn jacket. Lieutenant Thomas Caldwell, British Army observer, recently attached to American forces as part of a military exchange program. He was tall and lean, with sun-weathered skin and eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. His reputation had preceded him, a decorated marksman who had served in Afghanistan and Sudan, known for unconventional tactics that made superior officers uncomfortable. Whitmore met him in the command post, a sparse room with maps pinned to every wall. Red X marks dotted the papers like a disease spreading across the territory. "We are glad you are here, Lieutenant, but I will be honest with you. This is not the organized warfare you are accustomed to. These Apache warriors are ghosts. We send out patrols of 20 men. Half do not return. Our best sharpshooters cannot get a clear shot before the enemy disappears into the rocks." Caldwell studied the maps in silence, his finger tracing the pattern of attacks. His voice was quiet, almost thoughtful. "Ghosts bleed like any man, Captain. They simply understand this land better than your soldiers do. You have been fighting their war on their terms. That must change." Whitmore felt a flash of irritation. British arrogance. What could this outsider possibly know about Apache tactics that his experienced officers did not? "And I suppose you have a solution, Lieutenant?" Caldwell pulled a dented tin can from his pack. Campbell's tomato soup, the label faded and peeling. He set it on the table between them. "This, Captain. This is how we turn the tide." Whitmore stared at the soup can, then at Caldwell, wondering if the desert heat had scrambled the man's brain. Before he could respond, a sentry burst through the door. "Sir, Apache raiding party spotted 3 miles north. They hit the lumber camp at dawn. Took 6 horses and supplies. They are heading toward Skeleton Canyon." Whitmore grabbed his hat and gun belt. Caldwell remained motionless, still studying his maps. "Are you coming, Lieutenant? Or do you plan to fight them with soup cans from here?" Caldwell finally looked up, and something in his expression made Whitmore pause. It was not fear or hesitation. It was the look of a chess player who had already seen 10 moves ahead. "No, Captain. I will head out alone before dawn tomorrow. Give me a horse, 200 rounds of ammunition, and 20 empty soup cans. I will need them cleaned and polished until they shine. You want to go alone? That is suicide. The Apache will gut you before you make it 2 miles. Perhaps, or perhaps they will finally have something to chase besides your frightened patrols." That night, Caldwell worked by lamplight in the quartermaster's shed, preparing his equipment with meticulous care. Soldiers passing by peered through the windows, watching the strange British officer line up soup cans and test their weight, muttering calculations under his breath. Some laughed. Others shook their heads. The crazy Brit would be dead by noon tomorrow, they agreed. Just another fool who thought he understood Apache warfare. But Sergeant First Class Miguel Herrera, a Mexican-American tracker who had survived more Apache encounters than anyone at the fort, watched Caldwell with different eyes. He had seen something in the way the lieutenant studied the terrain, the way his fingers traced elevation lines on the maps. Herrera had fought alongside men who understood that warfare was not just about courage or firepower. It was about thinking like your enemy, about turning their strengths into weaknesses. He approached Caldwell as the lieutenant packed his saddlebags. You really think you can take down Apache warriors with soup cans, sir? Caldwell looked up, a faint smile crossing his weathered face. Not with the cans themselves, Sergeant, but with what they represent. Every warrior has pride. Every hunter has patterns. And every man, no matter how skilled, can be made to make a mistake. Herrera nodded slowly. He did not fully understand yet, but he recognized the tone. This was not arrogance. This was cold, calculated confidence born from experience. How many do you think you can get, Lieutenant? Caldwell cinched his saddle tight and checked his rifle one final time. A custom Whitworth with a scope he had brought from England, accurate to nearly 1,000 yards in the right hands. All of them, Sergeant. Every single one who comes for me. Caldwell rode out at dawn, alone. The morning mist clung to the desert floor as his horse picked its way through a narrow ravine toward the Dragoon Mountains. He had studied the attack patterns for hours. The Apache raiders moved in a predictable arc, hitting supply routes, then retreating to high ground where they could observe army movements for days. They owned the high ground. That was about to change. By midday, he reached his chosen position, a rocky outcrop overlooking a dried riverbed that Apache scouts used as a travel corridor. The location was perfect. 300 yards of open ground in every direction, scattered boulders for cover, and most importantly, elevation. He dismounted and began his work. The soup cans came out first. Caldwell placed them strategically on rocks at varying distances. Some 50 yards out, others at 100, a few at 200 yards. He positioned them to catch the sunlight, their polished surfaces flashing like mirrors across the landscape. To anyone watching from the surrounding hills, they would look like metal objects. Canteens, perhaps, or rifle barrels, or the glint of cavalry buttons. Then he settled into a natural depression between two boulders, arranged his ammunition within easy reach, and began the waiting game he had perfected in a dozen colonial wars. His Whitworth rifle rested on a makeshift sandbag rest. The scope was calibrated. His breathing slowed to a meditative rhythm. The Apache scouts found him within 2 hours. He saw them as fleeting shadows on distant ridgelines, studying him through the heat shimmer. They would be confused. A lone soldier, exposed, seemingly unaware of his vulnerability. The soup cans glinting in the sun like a poorly concealed position. It looked like amateur hour, a foolish white soldier who did not understand that shiny objects gave away positions. But that was exactly the point. The first warrior made his move near sunset. A dark figure detached from the rocks 400 yards to the northeast, moving with fluid grace toward what he thought was Caldwell's flank. The Apache was magnificent, pure economy of motion, using every shadow, every depression in the ground. He was closing in on one of the soup cans, probably thinking he could circle around to the soldier's blind side. Caldwell's finger found the trigger. He exhaled slowly, adjusted for wind and distance, and squeezed. The Whitworth cracked like thunder in the stillness. For 100 yards away, the warrior fell without a sound. The desert went silent. Even the insects seemed to hold their breath. Caldwell did not move, did not celebrate. He simply reloaded with practiced efficiency and returned his eye to the scope. The soup cans continued to gleam innocently in the fading light. Within the hour, 2 more warriors appeared, moving to investigate their fallen comrade. They were cautious now, but curiosity and warrior pride demanded they understand what had happened. 2 more shots, 2 more bodies in the desert dust. The trap had been set, and the Apache, for the first time in this campaign, were the ones being hunted. Night fell over the Arizona desert like a black curtain, but Caldwell did not move from his position. He knew the Apache fought at night better than any force on earth. They would come for him in darkness, confident in their superiority. He sipped water sparingly from his canteen and waited, his rifle loaded, his senses heightened to every sound carried on the desert wind. The attack came at midnight. They moved like liquid shadow, at least a dozen warriors converging from multiple directions. But Caldwell had prepared for this. Before darkness fell, he had memorized every rock formation, every distance marker, every approach angle. The soup cans served a second purpose now. In the moonlight, they created false reference points, drawing fire and revealing positions. Muzzle flashes erupted from the darkness. Bullets ricocheted off rocks near the soup cans. Caldwell counted the shooters by their positions, noted their patterns, and began returning fire. Each shot was calculated. Each round found its mark. The Whitworth's superior range meant he could hit targets they could not even see clearly. By dawn, 8 more Apache warriors lay dead in the killing ground around his position. The survivors melted back into the hills, regrouping, reassessing. This was no ordinary soldier. This was something they had not encountered before, a hunter who thought like they did, who used patience and terrain and deception as weapons. Word spread through the Apache camps. The British ghost who fought with shining metal spirits. The sniper who could kill from impossible distances. Warriors who had terrorized the frontier for months now found themselves afraid to move in open ground. If you are still watching and want to see how this impossible battle ends, this is the moment to subscribe. Because what happens next will change everything you thought you knew about the Apache Wars. The real turning point is just beginning. On the second day, Caldwell relocated to a new position 3 miles south, repeating his soup can strategy with methodical precision. The Apache came again, driven by pride and the need to eliminate this threat to their operations. More warriors fell to his rifle. By the third day, the pattern had shifted entirely. The hunters had become the hunted. Captain Whitmore received reports from scouts who could hardly believe what they were seeing. A single British soldier had created a no-go zone in Apache territory. Supply convoys were moving freely for the first time in months because the raiders were focused entirely on eliminating Caldwell. And they were losing. On the 4th morning, Sergeant Herrera rode out with a relief column, expecting to find Caldwell's body. Instead, they found him calm and methodical, relocating his soup cans to a new configuration. His ammunition stocks low but his spirit unbroken. "How many, Lieutenant? How many have you taken down?" Caldwell did not look up from his work, his voice matter-of-fact. 97 confirmed. "Give me one more day, Sergeant. Just one more day." The 5th day began with an eerie silence that made even Herrera nervous. The sergeant had stayed behind with 3 other soldiers, positioned a half-mile back to provide emergency support if needed. Through their field glasses, they watched Caldwell prepare his position on a mesa overlooking the San Pedro River Valley. The soup cans were arranged in a new pattern, more spread out this time, creating a wider field of illusion. Then the horizon came alive. What appeared to be the entire Apache raiding force emerged from the canyons, at least 40 warriors, maybe more. They had decided to end this humiliation with overwhelming numbers. Geronimo himself was reportedly among them, determined to crush the British sniper who had made his fighters look like amateurs. Herrera gripped his rifle, fighting the urge to ride forward. This was suicide. No man could hold against those odds. But Caldwell had prepared for exactly this moment. His final gambit. The soup cans were positioned not just as decoys now, but as psychological weapons. He had arranged them to create the illusion of a fortified position with multiple defenders. In the harsh morning light, the gleaming cans suggested an entire squad of soldiers spread across the mesa. The Apache warriors split into groups, attempting to flank from 3 directions simultaneously. It was a brilliant tactical maneuver that would have overwhelmed any normal defensive position. But Caldwell was not defending. He was conducting a symphony of death. His first shot dropped the lead scout on the eastern approach. Before the body hit the ground, he had pivoted and fired west, taking down a warrior attempting to scale the mesa's southern face. The Whitworth's bolt worked like a machine, his movements so fluid they seemed rehearsed. Reload, acquire target, breathe, fire, each action flowing into the next without hesitation. The Apache warriors, brave as they were, found themselves in an impossible situation. Every time they moved toward what appeared to be an undefended flank, a bullet found them from an unexpected angle. The soup cans created confusion about where the shots were actually coming from. Some warriors fired at the gleaming decoys, wasting ammunition. Others froze, unable to determine the real threat. Caldwell worked methodically through his remaining ammunition. 70 rounds. 60. 50. Each shot counted. Each bullet represented a life, an enemy warrior who would never raid another settlement. He felt no joy in the killing, only the cold satisfaction of a job executed with precision. The Apache began to break. First in small groups, then in a general retreat. They had never encountered anything like this. Their tactical superiority, their knowledge of the terrain, their legendary stealth, all of it rendered useless against a single man who had turned their own methods against them. By noon, 15 more warriors lay dead on the approaches to the mesa. The remaining force scattered into the mountains, their morale shattered. Caldwell lowered his rifle, finally allowing himself to feel the exhaustion that crashed over him like a wave. 112. In 5 days. With nothing but skill, patience, and 20 soup cans. Herrera and his men reached Caldwell's position by early afternoon. The British lieutenant sat against a rock, his rifle across his lap, eyes scanning the horizon with the vigilance of a man who had learned never to fully relax. His uniform was caked with desert dust, his lips cracked from dehydration, but his hands remained steady. The sergeant dismounted and approached slowly, almost reverently. Around them, the evidence of the 5-day siege lay scattered across the landscape. Spent brass casings glinting in the sun, the soup cans still standing sentry at their positions, and in the distance, the shapes of fallen warriors being retrieved by their companions under a hastily arranged truce. Lieutenant, Fort Huachuca is calling you back. Captain Whitmore wants a full report. Caldwell nodded slowly, finally allowing himself to stand. His legs protested after days of remaining in firing positions, but he showed no weakness. He began collecting his soup cans methodically, cleaning each one before placing it back in his pack. Herrera watched, understanding now the genius of the simple deception. The Apache had been beaten not by superior numbers or firepower, but by psychology and precision. The ride back to Fort Huachuca took 3 hours. Word had spread faster than wildfire. When Caldwell's horse passed through the gates, soldiers lined the parade ground in spontaneous formation. No orders had been given. They simply came to witness the impossible. A single man who had accomplished what entire battalions could not. Captain Whitmore stood on the headquarters steps, his expression unreadable. When Caldwell dismounted and saluted, the captain returned it crisply, then extended his hand. I owe you an apology, Lieutenant. When you asked for soup cans, I thought you had lost your mind. I was wrong. Caldwell shook his hand firmly but without arrogance. You were not wrong to doubt, Captain. You were simply thinking conventionally. The Apache respect strength and cunning. I gave them both, but in ways they did not expect. The cans were never about deception alone. They were about making them question everything they knew about their enemy. That evening, a dispatch rider arrived from division headquarters. The Apache raids had ceased entirely across the southern territories. Geronimo's forces had withdrawn deeper into Mexico, their spirits broken by the realization that the U.S. Army now had weapons they could not counter. The psychological impact of Caldwell's stand had achieved what months of conventional warfare could not. But Caldwell took no pleasure in the accolades that followed. That night, he sat alone in the officers' mess, writing a detailed after-action report that would later be studied in military academies across 2 continents. His methodology was clinical, mathematical, even stripping away the romance to reveal the cold calculus of asymmetric warfare. Sergeant Herrera found him there near midnight. The men want to buy you drinks, sir. Celebrate the victory. Caldwell looked up from his papers, his eyes distant. 112 men died because I understood ballistics and human nature better than they did. That is not something to celebrate, Sergeant. That is something to remember. 3 years later, London, England, 1889. Lieutenant Thomas Caldwell, now promoted to major, stood in the War Office Library, surrounded by young officer candidates eager to hear about the Arizona campaign. His hair had grayed at the temples, and a slight limp from an unrelated skirmish in India marked his gait, but his eyes still held that calculating sharpness that had made him legendary. On the table before him sat a polished Campbell's tomato soup can, mounted on a wooden plaque with a brass inscription, "The Soup Can Campaign Fort Huachuca, 1886. A fresh-faced lieutenant raised his hand eagerly. Sir, is it true you single-handedly changed the course of the Apache Wars with nothing but soup cans and a rifle? Caldwell smiled faintly, the kind of expression that suggested the truth was more complicated than legend allowed. I changed nothing, Lieutenant. I simply demonstrated that unconventional problems require unconventional solutions. The Apache were masters of their environment. I did not try to beat them at their own game. I changed the game entirely. Another officer spoke up, his tone skeptical. But surely, sir, the numbers have been exaggerated. 112 kills in 5 days seems impossible. Caldwell walked to the window overlooking the Thames, his reflection ghostly in the glass. War is mathematics disguised as chaos. Superior position plus accurate weaponry plus psychological advantage equals predictable outcomes. The Apache expected conventional tactics. I gave them theater. Every shining soup can was a question mark in their minds. Every impossible shot was a seed of doubt. By the third day, I was not just fighting warriors. I was fighting their belief in their own invincibility. He turned back to face the room, his expression serious. But understand this, those 112 men were not statistics. They were fathers, brothers, sons. Skilled fighters defending what they believed was theirs. I took no joy in their deaths then, and I take none now. The lesson is not about killing efficiently. It is about thinking creatively when conventional wisdom fails. After the lecture, as the officers filed out, a telegram arrived. It was from Sergeant Miguel Herrera, now retired and living in Tucson. The message was brief. Apache elder visited me yesterday. Said to tell the British ghost that Geronimo himself speaks of you with respect. You changed how they saw warfare. Some lessons cost blood. He wishes you peace. Caldwell folded the telegram carefully and placed it inside his journal, next to a faded photograph of the Arizona desert and 20 soup cans arranged on sun-baked rocks. The soup can on the plaque caught the afternoon light, its surface gleaming just as it had in that merciless desert 3 years ago. A simple object that had become a symbol of how intelligence could triumph over impossible odds. Outside, London carried on with its bustling indifference to the stories of distant wars. But in military colleges and frontier forts across 2 continents, officers studied the soup can campaign, understanding that sometimes the most powerful weapon was not the one you fired, but the one that made your enemy question everything they knew.